them to come up with cash, right? They can't just send their kids to school unless they also do a whole bunch of other things that generate the fee payments. Yeah, I don't need to talk about this. You guys have got this all figured out already. Never mind. In any case, I would encourage you. I'm going to pick up this piece of orange so I don't step on it. I would encourage you to notice these issues as they come up in other movies, although they will not come up in the movie on Tuesday about grass. Okay. I think I've covered what I wanted to cover. No other questions? Have I left something out? Anything that you thought about when you watched this movie? You thought, wow, that we haven't discussed at all? No? Okay. Let's move on. Or should we take our break now, since we've sort of a logical stopping point? Why don't we try having our break now? It's a little early, but 5 minutes? Okay. Okay. Whoops. All right, during the break, I had a brief conversation with the GSIs, and I thought of a couple of things I wanted to bring out about the movie before we move on. So if it's all right, a couple of things. Another level of this question of territoriality, which I didn't bring up earlier, and that is we talked about the territoriality within the favelas, which is a sort of small scale, the turf lines between the gangs. We talked about the territoriality at the scale of the city as a whole, in which the favelas are contrasted with the more developed, or whatever you want to call them, affluent parts of Rio. We didn't talk so much about the favelas and their territoriality with respect to an even larger scale of essentially the international world of philanthropies, nonprofits, community development foundations, that kind of thing. I mean, Afro Reggae takes off and begins to attract attention not just within the favelas, not just within Rio, but actually internationally. And part of its ability to grow and flourish is that it's able to establish these connections that are actually international and attract support at that scale, right? And one of the messages that the favelas, I'm sorry, go ahead. One of the messages that Afro Reggae is concerned to communicate to the world is precisely that the favelas are not just these sort of cesspools of violence and drugs and guns, right? That they in fact are very human places where very innocent, hardworking, virtuous people are trying very hard to make a go at things against extremely long odds, right? And if they can communicate that alternative identity about their neighborhoods effectively, that actually has some effect, right? That can change the circumstances that they find themselves in and alter their relationship at all these scales, right? Alter the relationship of Afro Reggae to the rest of the favelas and their residents, alter the relationship to the state locally and nationally, that kind of thing. Also very interesting that the leaders of Afro Reggae insist to these international development people that no, we can't just sort of distill this into some kind of recipe and then start walking around every other favela in Rio or Sao Paulo or someplace else and somehow make it work. It's not something that's simply transferable to other places, even if those other places might look similar, right? There are plenty of international development programs that would love to find the answer And they might look to Aforege and think, aha, here's the answer to the problem of the slums, or it's a partial answer. But the folks who are actually there on the ground doing this recognize that it's not that simple, that it's very much particular to their circumstances and their community and the people that they have found and the things that they have done together to move forward in the ways that they have. Did you have something to? Okay. Okay. I mean, this is a grassroots movement, and in many ways, it can't continue to work if it loses that particularity, that connection to the circumstances there, and simply trying to extract some kind of abstract formula from their success and assume that it will work someplace else is a mistake, and it's actually a very common mistake. Now, the final thing I wanted to draw out also is the moment when his name is Nelson, is that right? Anderson, sorry. You see, there's a problem. I've seen the movie 3 or 4 times, but not this year. He's in the midst of a sort of building battle between the gangs, and one of the gangs has decided to basically chase him down, and they're sending a whole group of armed guys to go after him, and a lot of his friends are telling him, you've got to get out of here, right? What does he do? He stays. Why does he stay? Okay, he knows that if he runs, if he flees from them, he will essentially confirm in their minds his own guilt, even if it's not true. It will convey a message to them that somehow he knows he is in the wrong or he is guilty, that they do have some reason to be chasing him, and that will in fact make matters worse. And he stands his ground. And he survives. I mean, it actually turns out well for him, right? Now, the question I would ask is if you could think about that in relation to questions of authority, questions of legitimacy. Why is it so important, that split-second decision, that split-second confrontation? Why does that have such a power to affect the way people perceive him and what they do? Think about it in relationship to the police, right? And the fact that the police don't have the kind of legitimacy that they would need to be able to simply stand their ground and persuade these people that they're in the right. These split-second sort of micropolitics of these encounters and the effects they can have on perceptions of who's right, who's wrong, who can be trusted, who can't be trusted, and how that relates to the issue of legitimacy, which we will be coming back to in connection with the state and what the state is or means. All right, now let's go on. Any other last thoughts? Okay, so now we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to get back into this part of the semester, or this part of the syllabus, in which we're once again thinking not about Rio in the recent past, but the history of the last, say, 10 or 12,000 years, and Crosby's argument about the Neo-Europes and why the Neo-Europeans have come to dominate in the Neo-Europes. I showed you this slide already in a previous lecture. The megafauna of the New World, or the Americas, that went extinct as humans made their way, as best we know anyway, from the Bering Land Bridge about 11,500 years ago approximately, down to the southern tip of South America. Took about 1,000 years, 11 kilometers a year for North America, 15 kilometers a year for South America. The extinctions that have been found correlating very closely with this movement of people, right? And he says that the humans were shock troops for the Neo-Europeans. I've already covered this a little bit. I want to make sure that it makes sense, and then I want to extend this a little bit. So, overkill in Crosby. Summarizing, again, this is material that we actually discussed last week. The New World megafauna were not adapted to humans because they had evolved in the absence of humans. Human arrival caused or accompanied the extinction of these large fauna, and therefore the New World lacked potential animal domesticates. In other words, it didn't have the variety, the diversity of large animals that could potentially be domesticated to become livestock. Does that argument make sense to everyone? Are you comfortable with that? The next piece is that the New World peoples who evolved in the Americas after arriving and after the disappearance of these megafauna lacked immune resistance to human livestock-related diseases. And this, again, it's built on a comparison between the Old World and the New World, and the kinds of, in this case, we're talking about germs that evolved in those two different places, and then how those germs affected the immune systems of the people in those two places. And we're building up to an understanding of why so many native peoples in the Americas died of diseases upon contact with the germs that Europeans brought to the New World with them. Okay? Crosby says, quote, the most important contrast between the Sumerians and their heirs on the one hand, so we're talking about the Old World, Eurasians, and the rest of humanity on the other involves the matter of livestock. I stressed this once before. And we want to think about why that would be the case. What were these livestock from the Old World? One was the horse, which he says enhanced the mobility, power, military might, and general majesty of humans. And it's true if you read the accounts of the first contact between the Spaniards and, say, the Incas, or the Spaniards and the Mayans, the folks in Mexico, the folks in Peru. The horse was an extremely important, how should we put it, animal technology, right? And it wasn't just important for the speed and the power that they brought, it was also important just for the sheer terror that they could inspire, right? If you've never seen a horse, you've never even conceived of the possibility of a horse, and suddenly you see a bunch of guys riding on horseback, what do you think they are? How do you make sense of them? Are they humans or not? Are they two-headed something or others? Do they have 4 legs or 6? What's going on? They're absolutely astonishing, right? We also have pigs and lambs and cows to consider, which provided for themselves while waiting to be called on to provide for their masters. What is this about? Yeah. Okay. Remarkable thing about these animals. They're way better than tractors, right? They actually feed themselves. They can feed themselves without you necessarily having to do much of anything to provide that food. Obviously, that depends on the circumstances, where you are. But in many ways, the beauty of these animals is, first, that they can feed themselves. They can eat whatever they find growing or perhaps discarded. Secondly, they also reproduce themselves, right? No one's come up with a tractor that can do that yet, right? They can have its own babies. They can grow up to replace the parents. It's pretty cool the way animals can do that, right? Livestock, depending on where you are and the type of animal and the practices associated with it, can provide blood, milk, and meat for food. There are places in the world still today where livestock blood is an important source of protein, nutrients for humans. Leather and wool for shelter and clothing. Manure for crop fields or for fuel. Again, this is a remarkable thing about animals. Even their waste is valuable or can be valuable to humans. You can cycle it back through your other systems, whether it's to fertilize crops or whether it's to burn for heat and energy to cook food or keep yourself warm. And traction for plowing. You can put plows on some of these animals, and they will enable you to grow significantly more food because they can till the soil, right? Pull the tools that till the soil. And you can see all the feedback loops that this makes possible in terms of the more food you grow, the more animals you can feed if you are feeding them the food that you grow, right? The more animals you can feed, the more manure you have. The more manure you have, the more fertile your fields can be and the more food you can grow, that kind of thing. This begins to give you a sense of why livestock were so important from a simple production point of view from the old world, in the old world, the kinds of surpluses that these animals would make possible in the old world. And there simply weren't analogous animals available to the peoples of the Americas, right? We talked about this before. There were turkeys. Turkey manure can be important fertilizer, but you can't plow a field with a turkey. The ability of domesticated animals, a renewable resource, to create foods for humans out of what humans cannot eat. Another extremely important virtue of livestock is that they can consume foodstuffs that are not foodstuffs for humans. We don't have the system necessary to live off of grass alone, right? But these animals do. They can, pigs and goats, for example, can eat all kinds of things that we don't want to eat. And they can turn that into energy and food and all the other things that we just talked about. On top of that, they also contributed to the evolution of the portmanteau biota. The weeds, the microbes, the vermin, and so forth. Now, this may seem a little bit harder to make sense of than the things we just talked about, right? I mean, the other stuff is pretty obvious. These animals are food, these animals create manure, these animals pull plows, that kind of thing. But this stuff is a little more indirect or a little bit harder to, or less obvious, right? Why should livestock contribute to weeds? The evolution of weeds. Yeah. Okay, they have a selective impact on vegetation, right? They will eat certain plants in preference to others. Different animals will eat different suites of plants, but if you put a cow in a pasture, it will go around and find the plants it wants to eat the most and eat those, and other plants it will totally ignore. There are plants it will totally ignore no matter what. There are other plants it will ignore until it runs out of the plants it likes more. And then it will start eating them, and so on and so forth, right through the line. Similarly, everything an animal does to contribute to crop agriculture creates or encourages the circumstances, the conditions in which humans are plowing the soil, planting certain plants. They want those plants to grow. They don't want the other plants to grow. But that plowing opens up niches. It disturbs the soil and creates opportunities for other kinds of plants to grow. And those plants eventually over time evolve such that that is their niche. Their niche is to grow in disturbed soil. Livestock can disturb soil and open up those niches. Plows do it on a vastly more intense scale. And weeds are in many ways, what we think of as weeds are the result over many, many thousands of years of evolution of those plants in those conditions, in those circumstances, which is also to say that those types of evolutionary processes were not happening in the New World in the absence of these animals. And when the animals arrive with the humans and enable these practices or cause these disturbances, the niche comes with them, and so do the weeds. And the weeds come not because people did it on purpose, right? Weeds are extremely adept. They have evolved precisely to create seeds that get moved inadvertently by animals, by humans, by wind. Even to this day, a lot of the movement of seeds from weeds happens on the underside of trucks, right? That happen to have driven along a road, and the seeds actually manage to get attached to the truck and move along. And that's why in many parts of the western United States, for example, every road will have a little corridor down either side of weeds that have gotten there courtesy of the travelers along that road. Microbes and vermin. Can't remember if there's, no. We will go into this issue of microbes in more detail in a subsequent lecture, if I remember correctly. But everything that I just said with respect to plants and the ways in which livestock alter the conditions in which plant evolution happens also applies to microbes and also applies to vermin or small animals, rodent pests, that kind of thing, who also find new niches that would not exist in the absence of those livestock. And they become important players in the portmanteau biota as well. So how do we think about human-livestock interactions? There are a bunch of different ways we can think about this conceptually. We can think about it hierarchically. We can say, the humans are in charge. They're the ones on top. The animals are simply servants, subordinate to the humans. We can think about it instrumentally. The livestock are just tools. They allow humans to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. They augment human productive output and power. On the other hand, we can think about it symbiotically. Everyone know what symbiotically means? What symbiosis is? Yes? No? You're allowed to say no? That's okay. We're talking about a relationship in which they each benefit from the other. That's what symbiosis is a relationship in which both players, both parties to that relationship benefit. They depend on each other, but they also gain from each other.